What is going on, guys? Jack here, and welcome to the end of Season 17, which makes it episode 123 of the Rise to Glory here with Gibraltar Apex. And wow, I mean, it's been a relatively short kind of season, I guess, in terms of the number of episodes, but I mean, it's still been another great year for us to reach the Champions League quarterfinals for another year in a row. Is a really good feat for us, and of course today we will be wrapping up with the Rocket Cup final. That is going to be coming up against College Europa, who, I don't know, they're not going to be an easy team, but we should still be expecting to win. You can see they've constantly been kind of in the top half, really, of the Premier Division table with just a few exceptions. Either way, if we just look at the league table and how that finished real quick, you can see obviously we did go unbeaten. It's not really that unusual at this point. In the relegation playoff, Lynx beat our affiliates Gibraltar United, so that's quite nice. Of course, last year, Leo FC, who were our affiliates, got promoted, and as a result, that was kind of terminated, kind of the partnership between the two sides. And in some ways, the cynical side of me kind of is glad that, well, Gibraltar United haven't been promoted, because it means that we will still have them for next year. Either way, looking at the team here and looking at kind of where we lie, you can see obviously top of the league, 155 goals scored. Just to quickly compare that to where we were last year, if we just have a look. We got 155 goals, positive goal difference in 27 games. Last year, that's a minor improvement. We actually conceded the same amount of goals as well, 4 in total, which, I don't know, it's more than I'd like, because I really want to go for that flawless year. We're still kind of not at the peak we were, say, 4 years ago, where we really were smashing teams. There's a little bit of a difference, I guess, between the amount of goals, really. 2026-27 was kind of the pinnacle of all that in terms of just how well we did. But I guess with teams like College Europa stepping up, it's kind of just inevitable that we aren't going to win by quite as many goals. Anyway, just a little update on Gibraltar Lions, because I didn't talk about them and kind of how they got on Europe this year, beyond kind of the fact they got to the Europa League group stage. They actually just crashed out of the group stage relatively disappointingly. They did actually end up getting a few results towards the end of the group stage and actually ended on 5 points, but unfortunately for them, that was kind of all they did. They were a little bit underwhelming, I think it's fair to say. I mean, 5 points, you know, that's not the worst total in the world, and if you're in the Champions League, I'd be kind of really praising them for that, but unfortunately for them, you can see in their group Chelsea and Sevilla, who actually went on to be winners, topping the group quite convincingly. Anyway, let's just have a quick look through some of our results and perhaps some of the more memorable ones along the way. Of course, the Champions League game last episode was a little bit of a disappointment, but to get that 2-2 draw against Manchester City, I think, is a very good result. It is also worth noting that Manchester City, I do believe, went on to win the Champions League. So, you know, to lose to the champions, there is some pride, I guess, to be gained in that. You can see they actually beat Real Madrid 2-1. So, as much as I'm perhaps disappointed at the fact we did lose to Manchester City, the fact we lost to the eventual winners is kind of a silver lining in that regard. Anyway, you can see here, we actually won the Senior League Cup final 9-0 against Lincoln Red Imps, a game that I decided not to live com. 13,000 fans turning up for it, Mosca scoring 5 goals, and well, he really has been the player of the year for us. He's been absolutely superb. He's improved a lot as well. You know, there's a noticeable increase in a lot of his attributes. You can really see that since the start of this year, it really starts kind of in the last third. Well, his acceleration's gone up to 16.2. Stuff like finishing has also climbed quite nicely from 16 all the way to, well, now 17. Stuff like heading as well. If we just take a quick look, you can see that improved slightly earlier on. But all in all, it's been really nice this year, and his agility has been perhaps the biggest improvement of all, increasing really from a 13 when he first signed for us all the way up to a 17. It's nice to see, you know, Mosca has really developed into that lead striker we've been looking for, and I'm desperate to hold on to him in the summer because, well, I kind of feel like he's a pretty invaluable player for us right now. Anyway, today we've got the Rock Cup final, as I already mentioned, against College Europa. We are going to get into that. Before we do that, we'll just take a quick look at the team of the year and stuff for the senior, well, not the Senior League Cup, the kind of Premier Division, the top flight, just how we got on there. Because I feel like that's always a good thing to look at. You'll notice that we were given £4.72 million for Champions League money. That followed the conclusion of the tournament. That was a nice little bit of money to receive. Of course, we're looking to win this Rock Cup for the prize money that's involved. There is quite a lot of money involved in this game, and as a result, you know, I want to do it. And I want to win it, I think it's fair to say. Anyway, you can see here we actually signed a new deal with the club, which was quite nice. 5-year deal, relatively small wages, but nevertheless, just happy to stay on at the club for another 5 years, hopefully. Glad the board kind of backed me in that regard. Anyway, you can see Smith dedicated his award to us. That is because he won the Gibraltarian First Division Player of the Year. And more on that in just a second, because we will start off by having a quick look. Actually, we'll start with the Player of the Year. You can see here, Paul Smith, 21 appearances, 19 goals, an 8.84 average rating for him. Been absolutely superb this year. Out on the left-hand side, 27 assists, which even by his standard is quite some amount. You can see, compared to previous years, that is his most ever assists. He also got 7 Player of the Matches, which is something that he hasn't got close to, really, since, well, the 2024-25 years, so almost 8-9 years ago now. Of course, this was his 10th season at the club, so a nice way for him to cap it off. Daniel Forster also a bit of a surprise package this year. The German, he joined us in January of last year, and this year he has just been on a whole nother level, really. You can see here, 19 goals, 29 assists. I mean, cannot argue with that one little bit. He has been just a completely different class for us, really. Anyway, Mosca coming third, and, well, he also won the top goal scorer of award, did Mosca. And actually, one thing I noticed about this year compared to last year was, and perhaps the previous few years, is my squad isn't as big as it has been. It isn't as bloated as it was. As a result, the squad really didn't get rotated quite so much as it has been in the past few years. And as a result, that kind of showed in the Team of the Year, because we had a lot more players featuring in it. But you can see Mosca getting on the goal scorers here. Pereira, surprisingly, on the goal scorers here. You know, 22 years old, this guy. Surprisingly good in the air for a winger, and I think that helps him quite a lot to get onto crosses at the back post. But you can see he's got 19 goals and 8 assists this year. It's not quite up to the standards he kind of set for himself last year, but with Forster coming into the squad, the German, he's struggled for kind of time on the pitch, and well, if we look at the injuries here, that 7 weeks out with a collarbone really did hit him hard this year, and as such, Forster really got the nod ahead of him for the majority of the season. Anyway, Vergara won Young Player of the Year, much deserved for him. £8 million, of course, spent on him. It seems like it's going to be £8 million well spent. Very happy with how he has performed for us. If you look here at his career stats, you can see 22 appearances, 12 goals, 11 assists. He was also big for us in Europe, getting 6 goals and 5 assists in 13 games. Fantastic return for the central attacking mid. And at 21, got his best years ahead of him, just hoping we can tie him down to that longer contract sooner rather than later. In terms of goal of the season, like a lot of years really, we just don't feature on it, which is a shame. We do have a feature, as we always do, with the Manager of the Year. Not entirely surprising, really. You win every game. It's very unlikely you won't win it. And as you can see, well, it now spans back, 17, 16 years. It's a little bit silly at this point. But at the same time, I'm hoping the league is going to start to become more and more competitive now. And, we'll kind of look forward to that, I guess. Anyway, 9 of our players picked in the Team of the Year. As I mentioned, we didn't really rotate our side so much, so it's not entirely surprising that we have quite so many players in this system. Perhaps the one area where I'm a little bit disappointed with the amount of strikers we have is, in the striker department, just because we've been playing one up top this year. So when the Team of the Year requires a 4-4-2, it's very unlikely that you're going to get that position nailed down. As you can see, Bay for Gibraltar Lions, he's been a very good player for them. I'm actually wondering how close he is to Gibraltarian nationality. He cannot be far off now. And actually, is he eligible for them? Yeah, he is eligible for them. So we might even see a few of the Spanish players that Gibraltar Lions have signed over the years starting to take up Gibraltarian nationality, which would be really good. It would really add some competitiveness to the division. You can see Modesto also has only 34 days till he gets nationality. So, the Gibraltarian national team really could see, it going from strength to strength this year, which would be pretty exciting. Either way, they are all the divisional awards. We're going to get into this first game of the live com. I say the first game, it's the only game of the live com. I'm still stuck in the days back when these end-of-season live coms involved a lot more games. Anyway, in terms of our team for today's game, this is the system, this is the tactic. We're going to go with the 4-2-3-1. In terms of the team, I think we're going to go with this. Cabasele, he's going to be playing at left back. I've not talked much about this guy since we brought him in, but the 21-year-old Belgium, obviously, I don't want to say we broke the bank to bring him in, but £21 million was a lot of money to part way with in order to sign him. And I think it's fair to say that, he's given us a good return so far, but I'm still expecting a little bit more from him. And, he's going to get a chance today for us out on the left-hand side. We've got Mustafa and Frigier down the middle. Nothing entirely surprising there. Mustafa did decline us a little bit before the start of the year, and he never really picked that back up. There's a few stats which haven't picked back up, such as his tackling, which at one point did sit at 16. You can see it was very marginal on a 15.6, which got rounded up. But since then, it has tailed off a little bit. So perhaps something to monitor there, but nevertheless, kind of Ramadan Mustafa, still a fantastic player for us. Right centre-back, Yves Frigier, the Frenchman. I mean, what can you say about this guy? It's his season at the club, but actually he's only been here 5.5 years because he signed in January for us. But since leaving Real Madrid for us, he really has been a standout player. He is also now eligible to play for Gibraltar, so I'm hoping that he's going to take up that nationality sooner rather than later, so that's something to look forward to there. Right back, we're going to go with Graphite, a player who has actually raised perhaps a few concerns about wanting to leave the club. If a bid came in of a sufficient amount in the summer, perhaps would be willing to part way with the 26-year-old, although just because of how flexible he is in terms of the positions he can play, part of me just wants to hold on to him for that regard. Anyway, you'll notice in goal actually for today's game, Young is not in goal. He is on international duty, which is a little bit of an annoyance. As a result, Francisco Salcedo comes into the squad, the Mexican. He's been brought in to do this job when Young is injured or just not available for selection. At 19, this is going to be a good kind of chance for him to get a bit of match experience on a big game, and I'm hoping he can kind of play to the occasion, I guess, in a lot of ways. Anyway, in midfield for today's game, I think we're going to go with Mora and Bouchard. Carlos Andres Mora, very good player for us, the centre mid. He's not great defensively, but I think he can definitely do a job for us here today. Alongside him, we have Joe Bouchard. It's his 10th year at the club. Let's see if he can get a memorable performance here on the last game of his 10th season. At 20 years old, though, or 28 years old. Just been a fantastic servant to the club. Really can't praise this guy enough. You can see this year, he's been a little bit disappointed by his standards. It's the first time ever in a season where he's played for us, where he's actually made less than 19 league appearances, or less than 20 league appearances, which is a little bit of a shock. But to be honest, this year's been one of his best years yet, especially in recent years with 7 assists. So that's good to see. Anyway, centre attack in mid, we are going to go with Vergara, number 45. The Argentine maestro, the youngster, really proving himself this year as a kind of top player for our team. Out on the right, we go with Daniel Forster, player, the German, who he's kind of surpassed all my expectations. If Pereira out on the right was a breakthrough performance last year, Forster has matched that this year in terms of how he's gone about introducing himself to the side, and I'm very, very happy with what he's done thus far. Anyway, out on the left, we have Paul Smith, I was about to say American. It's Australia, Jack. He's been here a while. I don't know how I don't know that by now. But 28 years old, this guy. Just, again, great player for us. As I already talked about, his stats this year have been some of his best yet. He has had a few injuries which kept him out of key European games, but even without it, we've managed to get some performances. And last but not least, in our starting 11 for today's game, we go with Mosca, the Brazilian. He's developed a lot, great physically. Injury proneness is still a little bit of a concern for this guy, but if he's not going to get injured and he continues to improve, I'm not going to worry myself too much with it. He's scoring goals for fun. He's not going to get to Tuzon's record total of 74 goals in a season, but 62 goals in a season for the 21-year-old, I think is a fairly fair return, and, well, you can't really complain about it too much, can you? Anyway, in terms of other players on the bench, Alberto Romero will be making his appearance. His contract runs out at the end of the year, the Gibraltarian. He's talking about moving on. I think with Salcedo coming into the squad, the Mexican goalkeeper, it's probably time to let him go. Our left back, we've got Graphite, who we can bring on. 24 years old, of course, his first season at the club this year. An 8.01 in all competitions for him, his average rating. A fantastic first season for him, really. Out the right, Pereira had a breakthrough year last year. Few injuries held him back, but all in all, Forster's fine form meant that he's just struggled to nail down that first team spot that was really his all of last year. Jose, the striker, who we signed for a relatively cheap fee this year. Just hasn't made a lot of appearances, but will be on the bench. That is because Helic is on international duty. This guy's asked to leave the club in the summer. I'd like to try and recoup what we paid for him, which was £3.7 million. Whether or not that's possible, I'm not entirely sure, and if it's not, I may well be tempted to keep hold of him. Anyway, the next player we have is Lamas. Now, this guy, if I'm honest, I'm a little bit disappointed with what we've got from this guy. The 23-year-old, I did sign with the intention of kind of being a rotation player, but I really thought at the time he might eventually fight for a first-team spot, be it in the centre mid position or at full-back or centre-back. Now, at centre-back, he's never really going to shine because of his jumping reach, but even so, we paid £7.5 million for him. And don't get me wrong, he's not performed badly. I just thought we were going to get a little bit more out of him than perhaps we have, especially at £7.5 million. But nevertheless, given the club's finances, given the money we have, it's not too much to part way with for a player who, despite perhaps being a little bit disappointing, has still been a kind of regular player in the first team. Anyway, the next player we have is Helic, the Polish maestro. 30 years old now, starting to hit that bit where we might start to see him tail off just a little bit. This year he's not played as many games as last year, but he's still got 10 goals in 10 in the league. Really can't complain about that, unfortunately, on international duty today. As is Ludwig Ljung, the Swede. 28 years old, this guy. I mean, what a player. What a player. He's been just on a whole nother level for us. I'm so happy with how this guy's done and how he's kind of been able to defy the critics in a lot of ways. Myself being included in that. I have been critical of this guy in the past, but over the last kind of really 3 or 4 years, he's come out into his own and really nailed down that #1 shirt for us. Anyway, JJ not going to be playing today, just giving him a bit of a break really. He's not played a ton of games for us. He actually featured quite heavily in the Champions League. The reason for that being is, of course, during the Champions League group stage, we did have quite a few injuries. And JJ, to be fair, when he came on and played, he performed pretty well. He did, of course, get sent off against Manchester City, which kind of screwed us a little bit. But with the exception of perhaps that one kind of black mark against his name, that red mark against his name for that performance, he's been very good this year. Next player we have is Fireloss, currently out with a chest injury. This guy's been a pleasant surprise this year. The Ecuadorian came in for Paul Smith when he was injured on a number of occasions, particularly in big European games. Got us some useful goals, particularly one against Lyon that stood out in the 1-1 home draw. He's a good player. At 20 years old, do I think he's going to develop into our first choice left back? I thought he was earlier on, if I'm honest. I thought when I signed him, this guy is the successor to Paul Smith. But to be fair, I thought that about a lot of left-backs in the save, such as Cabral. There's a few others. Tino was a player who I thought could do it. I feel like we're still searching for that long-term Smith replacement. But this guy, in the meantime, is more than an adequate backup to him. Anyway, the next player we have is another new signing this year, Gilvan. The Brazilian, unfortunately suspended for today's game. But the 21-year-old... he's done well this year. He's impressed me. At 21, he's got plenty of time still to improve. And in 22 appearances this year, which is actually quite a lot, he's got 6 assists and 1 goal. In Europe, he's been perhaps a little more underwhelming with only a 7.26. A lot of his performances came in the qualifying stages of the competition against weaker teams, hence the higher average rating. We also have Camilo Castano, who joined the club this year for a really cheap fee, to be fair, the Colombian. He's only 19. I like this guy. I think he's very, very good. And I'm pretty happy with how he's come on this year. I really wish we had a more suitable tutor for him. That's something I do want to look at perhaps for next year, is getting him tutored, just to try and get that determination just up a little bit. We've got a few options in terms of who could tutor him. Graphite might be the best match just to try and get his determination in the region of 16. To be fair on Castano, it's not exactly low at the moment. In fact, if we look here, it's actually 15. If we can improve it in any little way, I will try and do that with him. Anyway, the last player in the team, Walter Palermo, coming back from an injury, so won't play today, but a player who I signed really as a potential long-term left-back kind of player. And, he's had a few injuries, but he's developed okay. And actually, he's featured a surprisingly large amount this year at centre-back, 14 times to be precise. So, he's not come in and done the job I expected him to do, but at the same time, he's done the job that I've asked him to do when I have very, very well. And, fair play to him. He stepped up to the mark, the 21-year-old. Anyway, that's a little bit of a squad rundown as to what's been going down in our first team. Let us get into the game here against College Europa. You can see they're playing a 4-5-1. Clearly their intent is to overload the midfield, park the bus and see what they can do. Just going to try and encourage the players and see what we can do here. Of course, I'm really hoping that the league and domestically we're going to get more competitive over the next few years. I feel like at the moment, I believe the Premier Division rep is 33rd in Europe. I can't remember exactly what amount someone told me, but I think it was in the region of 30, maybe in the top 29 teams that we should expect to get the TV deal, which I've been confirmed is still in the game this year, of course. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I outlined it kind of at the start of the save as being one of the big kind of landmarks to hit. But essentially, with the Premier Division, the Gibraltarian League, and it's been the case for the last few years, when you get the league to a certain reputation, the league finally gets a TV deal. And when it gets this TV deal, it's not a small one. And I think in the past it's been in the region of £70 million. Whether or not it's still that this year, I don't really know. Obviously, that's a lot of money. I think one of the reasons behind it is obviously the league hits a certain reputation, a certain mark, where the game goes, okay, this league needs to start being shown on TV. So the game kind of generates, a TV deal to give all the clubs, because the enhanced reputation means it should get some TV money. Now, the thing is, because there are only 10 teams in the division, it kind of gets a little bit, I don't want to say wonky, but it gives everyone £70 million a year. Now, obviously, that's going to benefit me massively. £70 million a year is a big increase to the wage budget. That's a big increase to the transfer budget. It also impacts all sponsorships because the sponsors realise, hang on a minute, we're being shown on TV kind of thing. But it's also going to help us in terms of making Gibraltar a lot more competitive. Now, the AI in FM, you guys probably noticed, they're not great at building sides. But over the next kind of 5-10 years, I'm quite excited to see, hopefully, all this money that's been racked up being spent wisely by clubs all going professional, all building their own stadiums. It's of course worth noting that say every team receives £70 million a year, but they don't sign any players for the first 5 years for whatever reason. That's a lot of money that gets stocked up very, very quickly. In fact, to be precise, it's £350 million that they'd suddenly be sat on. And even if they don't sign players immediately, they're still going to have that money stored away. And it'll be interesting to see how teams slowly spend it. Either way, in this game, we are running fairly dominant. It's a cross which has gone in. Graf, I mean, he's going to claim it, son. You didn't mean it. Don't dab. Don't do that. It's 3-0 here. I feel like I can use this match now as a bit of a backdrop. I feel like whenever we play Gibraltar Lions, it's a little bit more of an even match. We met them, however, in the quarterfinals of the Rock Cup, and then kind of perhaps one of the other better teams in the nation, being Lincoln, we beat in the semi-final. It's fair to say, to be fair, though, College Europa probably the number 3 team in Europe. It's actually worth, not in Europe, in Gibraltar. It's actually worth noting they have one of our players here called Basong. I don't think I ever covered his transfer because it happened this year, but he was a Cameroonian who some of you guys may remember I signed and brought in. I was quite excited by him at the time. But he just didn't really develop for us. And with his contract running out at the end of this year, I offered him out to clubs. And actually, College Europa were one of the teams who came in for him. So we quite happily kind of sold him on to them. And he's quite a good player for them. He improves them a little bit. You know, it's nice to see teams that aren't kind of Gibraltar Lions coming in for some of our lesser known players. And I'd definitely like to start spreading the love in terms of giving, you know, not just Gibraltar Lions, our players when we try and sell them. Either way, we're on the attack here. Ball whipped in by Smith. Can he get it in at the second time of asking? He can. Forster hits the woodwork. It's 4-0 after 30 minutes. It's been a bit of a dominant display, I think it's fair to say. Modesta. That's one of Gibraltar Lions' players. I was about to say Mosca. He's been a little bit quiet by his standards. You expect him to score like 20 in this kind of game. Scored 5 in the Senior League Cup final. But, yeah, we'll see what he can do now, the number 30. He's probably heard me now. He's probably just going to score now. He's heard what I said about him. Ball in, cleared as far as Mora. Bang! Oh, it's hit the crossbar. Basson gets it away. What a goal that would have been. But, yeah, so far, so good. You know, Season 17, it's been a little bit briefer than perhaps some of our other seasons. I kind of feel like that's a sign of the times in terms of how well we are doing in Europe. It's worth noting, actually, that when it comes to domestic football, we did, of course, win the league, but we also went unbeaten again, and that has taken our unbeaten games total to over 300 matches now. That spans back kind of the last 12 years. Now, obviously, as I mentioned, I'm still hoping for that TV deal to really make things a lot more competitive in the coming years. It's not something that's going to happen overnight once the money arrives, but I don't know, I feel like we're getting very, very close to that point, and actually, I feel like this might be the year. As I said, I believe getting into the top 30 is kind of the benchmark for the TV deal to happen this year in FM16, from what I've heard of other people who are doing similar Gibraltar saves. So that's kind of what we're looking for. Mosca, that's the kind of goal I'm looking for. Turns his former teammate Basong inside and out, gets the goal in, makes it 5-0. But yeah, I'm excited for the future of this save. You know, I've tried to, I don't want to say I've rushed through this season, but I've tried to keep it briefer in terms of the amount of episodes I do, in terms of cutting out, you know, the unnecessary fluff. This is only the 6th episode of the season. And whilst I don't really ever want it to fall below 6 episodes a season, I feel like 6 is kind of an okay sweet spot, particularly at the moment, whilst we just try and get through the save, I guess you could say. You know, really the big games for us every year are the games in Europe. They're the games which really matter, and they're the games that you guys want to see, and I kind of completely appreciate that. But at the same time, if I was to do any fewer episodes, I kind of feel like there's a risk. You don't feel the journey of the save. You don't feel the grind that perhaps I feel. You don't see the players enough. I mean, if you see players play 3 games a year, I don't feel like you can quite connect to the players in the same way if you don't see kind of a player's profile, you know, a few times a year. How can you relate to how that player's done over the year, how he's performed in training? I feel like it's very difficult, and that's something that I kind of feel is quite important with my saves in general. Either way, let's make some changes here. There's not long left of the game. Let's take off Cabasele, who's had a great game, to be fair, the record transfer. To be fair, the entire team's had a pretty good game, it's fair to say. We'll make a few changes. We'll take off Forster, Mora, Cabasele, and bring on Grafwright, Pereira, and Lamas, just to get some fresh legs on. Actually, I said I brought on Grafwright. That is just Graphite, the left back we brought on. Either way, let's see. Can we get one more goal? Can we get one more? Oh, we have got one more. Moscow with the goal now. 6-0. That's his 64th goal of the season. I mean, that's not a bad total, is it, for the 21-year-old? I really hope we can tie him down to a long-term contract. I was about to say I'm hoping he can be the Daniel Sturridge of our side, but with him being injury prone, I don't think that's the comparison I really want to make there. I want him to be fit. And to be fair, this year he's not had too many injuries. It does make me wonder how severe his injury proneness is. Of course, it is an attribute out of 20. I don't know exactly how it works though, actually, because obviously I'm being told he's injury prone. Like, what value is considered injury prone? I don't actually know. With personalities, like if a personality kind of attribute like determination is above 15, it's considered like he's a determined player at that point. So I wonder if that's the same with injury proneness. Either way, I don't know why I'm dwelling on this. It's weird. When something pops into my head that I don't know about Football Manager, I sit there trying to work it out based off my knowledge. But it's weird. I don't have all the answers for this game. I've played this game for 12 years. I'm sure you guys are the same. Play Football Manager day and night, a lot of you. You probably don't know all the answers to everything. I feel like I still learn a little bit every now and then. Either way, though, a 6-0 victory, a good result there. We get £6.4 million in prize money. That's not quite the same jump it was last year. If you can remember last year, it went from being 1.2 million to something like 5 million in prize money. This year, if we just look at the Rock Cup, you can see 6.4 million. Last year it was at 5.1, so that's still a pretty sizable increase, really. You know, to increase the prize money by £1.2 million is very, very good indeed. You can see an overall financial breakdown of our year this year. We've got a little bit more money in prize money. That is pretty much purely down just the difference the Rock Cup has made, in all honesty. To be fair, it's been a good year for us this year. Our balance, it dipped at one point. It's now picked back up to £23 million. And you can see, actually, since really January, it's steadily increased, which is pretty nice. Our overall wage total has dropped for the year. So our overall expenses going out kind of during the season has decreased slightly. And that's been down to kind of a bit of a narrowing down of our squad now. We have I don't want to say we have quite a small squad, but we have a compact squad. We have a lot of players who can play a few positions. If an injury crisis was to strike, we could be caught a little bit short. There are a few positions I would like to bring in a backup in, one of which is kind of the left and right wing. I feel like we could benefit quite nicely from having a player who can play either side. Daniel Forster can kind of do that, but just not in the left winger position, kind of that left attacking mid. So that's something I might look to change and get him trained in. But elsewhere in the squad, it's been a good year. It's been a very good year. If we just look here at the kind of main stats, you can see Mosca, 64 goals for the year, 14 assists. I mean, you can't really argue with that, can you? Paul Smith, 29 goals, 34 assists. Daniel Forster, 26 goals, 40 assists. That's a crazy total. To get 40 assists, you can really see where the goals have come from this year. And it's been a lot from the wide areas. Anyway, Ernesto Vergara had another great year, the 21-year-old. 25 goals for him, a really great return, really. And 16 assists. And the only other player to exceed 20 goals for the year, Luis Pereira, with 20 goals and 14 assists for him. In terms of assists, obviously a lot of those players we've already talked about right there. I feel like Graphite and Graphite deserve a bit of a mention. Those two players, they've got 14 and 13 assists each. That's a really good return from them, from the fullback positions. Bouchard, who, as I already mentioned, had one of his better recent years. He got 7 assists in the league, 10 in all competitions. His goal-scoring tally wasn't the greatest, but he still did a great job for us. We'll take a quick look through the post-mortem squad review, which of course was provided by the one, the only, the beautiful second yellow card for me. I feel like I should have looked through this before this episode started. I must digress. At the end of last season's episode, I kind of sat there going, I really should look at this prior to kind of me actually recording and work out what I want to talk about when it comes to stats. I feel like we should go through some of the kind of more interesting stats, I guess, just to see how players have performed. So you can see in terms of tackles won, I mean, Lamas has not played that much football. He's played 1,000 minutes, but he's won 97% of his tackles. I mean, he's shone in that area, I guess. He's got 17 tackling, to be fair to him. Done a good job of breaking down the play when we've kind of called upon him. And I think when we played him for the most part, he's played more out wide in kind of the left back or right back position, but still good to see him play there. Of the kind of regular first team players, obviously, Cabasele, the record transfer with an 87% tackle completion percentage. It's worth noting that with him, he hasn't played in Europe this year to drag down that percentage. Of course, this represents all matches played. Worth noting that Ramadan Mustafa and Frigier with two pretty decent amounts, 87% tackle completion for Mustafa, 86% for Frigier. That is not a bad return. In terms of headers won, kind of another defensive stat, you can actually see Cabasele did a really good job there. A 94% headers won percentage. He's not even that great in the air. 12 jumping reach, 10 heading. He just does a good job, I guess, of outmatching kind of smaller wingers who stand alongside him. You can see also on this kind of around the top is, of course, Ramadan Mustafa. Not quite up to the same crazy stats he had last year. I think his stats last year was something like a 92% headers won, which is ludicrous. In terms of key headers, I think that's actually around the same amount he got last year, 174. So that's still pretty good for him. You can also see Frisier and Graphite up there when it comes to the headers won. In terms of distance covered per game, the hardest working players, well, it's the wingers and Vergara. To be fair, it's the wingers by quite some margin. Pereira covering 8.5 miles a game. Really does get up and down the wing well, of course. That's aided by his acceleration, pace, stamina, but also his work rate and natural fitness, his ability to stay fit and be able to do running around. I bet if we can compare his stats to Daniel Forster's work rate's probably a little bit lower. And that's quite evident, you know, a 12 work rate. And consider these guys both play on the right wing. And, well, you can see here, they've both played over 1,000 minutes. So they've played enough football, I feel, for us to be able to draw conclusions. But the difference between those two players is quite vast in that regard, which is quite interesting in a lot of ways, I find. Anyway, let's have a look at the number of tackles per game. We talked about defensive stats. Frisier, 3.73 tackles per game for him. And JJ, give you an honourable mention, my son. Obviously, often comes in and plays that kind of centre mid defend role for us, and does it very well for the most part. You can see he only has 13 tackling and 14 marking. He's hardly standout when it comes to his defensive qualities, but he just does that job well for us, JJ. A very well-rounded midfielder. I think his work rate and his just amazing physicals really help to exert himself on the pitch. Particularly that strength of his. That's a really, really impressive stat for him. Anyway, if we look at number of minutes played, not entirely surprising. I guess it is in some ways, but the top two players actually are Ramadan Mustafa and Frisier, and then Ludwig Young, followed by Mosca. Now, I guess the centre-backs is not too surprising. I've talked about it in the past, but I very, very, very rarely sub off my centre-backs. I very rarely rotate them around, in all honesty. I feel like that's one of the partnerships on the pitch which is the most important to kind of remain unchanged. Ludwig Young, again, not entirely surprising. He's actually had a few less minutes than the likes of Mustafa, mostly due to having some injuries towards the start of the year. You can see the next player, Mosca. Kind of surprised he's played quite so many minutes as he has. Of course, the striker, he's really become the number one choice this year. Even with us only playing one striker, I've been very hesitant to rotate him out of the side when it's avoidable. The 21-year-old's kind of rewarded that faith with some really nice development. And he looks like he's going to be just a kind of star player for us going forward. And I'm kind of excited to see how much more we can really get out of him, because I still feel like he's 21 now. He's still got a few years left of real kind of positive development, so I'm hoping we can make him into a really exceptional footballer. Vergara also making a mark. Of course, he's still young as well, 21 years old, this guy. Only joined us last January, so he's only been at the club for 18 months, but he really has kind of made that kind of centre attacking mid position his own. 3,400 minutes kind of implies that in a lot of ways. Anyway, if we look at average minutes per goal, this will be an interesting one, because I imagine it's going to be skewed slightly by the fact that some players haven't played so much time, and actually it isn't. Now, my theory here was basically that a player like Helic comes on off the bench in league games because he doesn't start for us anymore and gets a few goals, and so his goals per minute is absolutely insane. Actually, the truth be told, the big performer's Mosca. A goal every 56 minutes for him. That is a pretty crazy return in all competitions, if I might say so myself. I think the other thing worth noting is actually he has 109 key headers and wins half of his aerial duels, and has completed over 194 kind of key passes as a striker. That is a really impressive amount. Anyway, if we look at goals leading to mistakes per game, name and shame, this is the stat that we look at to work out who's to blame for us losing the Champions League. Unfortunately, only 5 mistakes actually leading to goals to this year, so I don't feel like we can blame anyone too much right there. In terms of crosses completed, Jose leading the line there, doesn't play that much for us. Kind of find it surprising that Gilvan and Bouchard are kind of the top two when it comes to crosses completed. I don't know if that tells you a lot about the fact that if a centre midfielder gets into a wide area to put in a cross, it means the attack's been more slowly built up, so there's more targets for them to reach in the middle. I feel like that's my theory behind it. I feel like with a winger putting a ball into the box, obviously they're often bombing down the wing. There might only be the 1 or 2 strikers in the box for them to aim for. Of course, with our system, we only have the 1 striker and then perhaps the centre attacking mid, whereas for a centre mid putting in the ball into the box, the chances are there's already players there waiting for it. So that's my conspiracy theory behind the crosses completed. I'm sure if I was to check kind of stats, I could actually work that out. Anyway, if we look at dribbles made per game, Forster and Smithley in the way there. Phylos and Pereira doing well as well. Kind of surprised by the lack of dribbles by Moscow. That said, his dribbling's not really his standout stat at 11. It's one of the areas which, if I just show you, I am currently training. I want him to improve in that area, and that's something I'm hoping that he is going to do over the summer and over the coming years, really, because it is perhaps the only glaring weakness that I think he has in his game right now for us. Anyway, we didn't look at interceptions earlier, just a quick look at it. Total number of interceptions made, 500 for Mustafa and Frisia. That's not bad. That's not bad, is it, boys? Key passes, we already talked about Moscow's contribution. Vigara, 312 key passes. That's ludicrous. Bouchard as well, still pulling the strings from deep. Gilvan doing a similar job when he's come in there, and also the wide midfielders. And actually, Graphite and Graph Wright both kind of contribute with quite a lot of key passes, really, for players kind of in the fullback position. Anyway, let's just have a quick look at the average ratings. Who was the best player of the year? It was really Paul Smith. I think that's fair to say. A 8.55 or 5.1 average rating for him. Moscow in second. I kind of agree with that in a lot of ways. I'm kind of surprised to see Filos so high up. Of course, he made quite a lot of appearances in the Premier Division for us, but he also made a decent amount of appearances in the Champions League. 2 goals and 1 assist for the 20-year-old. He's going to be 21 soon, to be fair to him. No one forget the cake. Let's not do a yah-yah. But no, he's done very well for us, to be fair. A player who, as I said, I don't know if he's the long-term solution to Paul Smith, but I'm hoping he can be. Anyway, that's like a little bit of a review, I guess, of the first team in numbers and what we've done. Just a quick look at the reserves and any players worth keeping an eye out on. I've talked about a few of these players in the past. Mohamed Sarr joined us in January. He's been very underwhelming, to be honest, the Senegalese player since he came in. Of course, kind of last year, our reserve squad was quite big by the end of the year. During this summer, as you know, really, if we just have a quick look at the transfers, I shifted a lot of the younger players on who I didn't think were going to be good enough for the first team and were clogging up the reserves. Players like Rota, Cabral, Ono, Elmo, J. Chul, Ganari. You know, these are players who are good players, but they've not kind of set the world alight for us. I wonder how Nick Austin's got on at Hamilton. I just want to check this. He got 14 goals in the Scottish Premiership. Was that enough to keep Hamilton up? Considering they have a sugar daddy owner and spent £17 million, you'd really hope it would be enough to keep them up, wouldn't you? They weren't in the relegation playoff, and actually they finished 4th. So here's the difference, perhaps, between them finishing second from bottom and now 4th. So, I don't know, fair play Nick Austin, you've turned around that Scottish team's kind of look. Are there any other players I want to look at? I actually noticed, if we look here, at last year's transfers, Christian Martinez was unhappy. You can see his abysmal happiness. He might try and force a move in the summer, and if he does, we get 50% of the money. You can't see it right now, but I'm kind of doing the hand signal, you know, for like money. I want some of the sell-on clause, Arsenal. Please sell him this year. That'd be really nice for us, because I mean, he wasn't a 35 million player now. If you can get £35 million for him, I'd happily take 17 million off your hands. Either way, I feel like that is kind of a review for this season. Not quite as long as last year's end of season review. I feel like I rambled quite a lot last year and there was quite a lot to explain. But having done such a in-depth review last year, I kind of feel like it's I don't know. I feel like there's not quite so much to cover this year. I could go over all the league stats in detail. I'll tell you what I'll do. I will flash some of the bigger ones on screen here, just so you guys can see them and who's been the big teams, really. But I don't feel like there's too much point going through all of these stats in too much detail. You can look through the left-hand side to see all the nitty-gritty bits. But as I said, all in all, Season 17 one to remember. I am hoping that we're going to get that financial detail. I guess the damp note of this year is the fact that our coefficient is actually going to drop by 1. And one of the reasons for this being is that the higher you rise up the coefficient, the more teams you obviously have in Europe and with a chance to play in Europe. But that also means that my contribution to our rank is less. So, for example, when there was only us in Europe, my contribution was the underlying factor behind Gibraltar. When then Gibraltar Lions started playing in Europe, I only contribute 50% of the points of the nation. And now that we're at 5 teams in the competition, and it's only really ourselves and Gibraltar Lions throwing around our weight, it is a lot harder to kind of maintain the coefficient. And unfortunately for us, Romania had a team go very, very far in the competition this year, and obviously they don't have quite so many spots, so they're actually going to leapfrog us. So that's a shame. We almost caught up with Greece though, so you know we're not that far off really, but we'll just see how things work out. We'll see what's new next year. We haven't got a lot of money to spend this year, of course. That Kabasele transfer did take a lot out of the budget. As you can see, £4.5 million remaining, £260,000 wage budget. I was looking at players whose contracts are expiring. There's a few players here who could be nice additions, really. Whether or not we can realistically sign them is, as you can see here, a whole nother task. Anyway, guys, I hope you did enjoy this end of season live com. If you did, as always, feel free to smash the like button. If you've got any comments, leave them down below. And other than that, it's me, Jack. and I will talk to you guys in a bit. I'm out.